Folks, all of you know that Legacy Precious Metals is a great sponsor of the Doug Collins podcast, and I can't tell you right now a more important time to know Legacy Precious Metals. They're right now, your investment portfolio, if you look at the stock market right now, you look at the inflation that's going on, you look at the uncertainty out there, I'm going to tell you, the investments that you're making need to have gold and silver to be a part of it. You need the precious metals. Navigators are people who have been there, they know what to look out for, and they know how to come back and navigate you through the streams of your financial situation, whether it's for your retirement or whether it's just in your long-term investment strategies. Legacy Precious Metals folks are people who listen. They listen to you, they listen to your needs, and they help you navigate this uncertain financial times. When you're seeing the fluctuations back and forth, people will actually need to find a place where they have a portfolio that is balanced. Having gold and silver in that portfolio is something that you can have as part of yours. Just go find them at legacypminvestments.com.
You want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it? The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Folks, this is going to be a great discussion today. I've met up with these folks at CPAC. A book's been written called The Spirit to Soar, and it's about the true story of former orphan and POW Lieutenant Colonel Barry Bridger, U.S. Air Force, retired. Colonel Bridger, I am also Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force as well. Got 20 years in, so we'll see if I make it that way. Then you got Jim Petterson. Jim is with us, and he is on that other blue, a little bit darker blue, the Navy side, which I started in. But I spent more of my time with the green guys down at Camp Pendleton when I was there as a chaplain. But folks, guys, it's good to have y'all with us. This has been an exciting. I got to look over the book, and let me just tell you, Jim, for writing it, but Barry, sir, for you and what you've been through. Thank you both for service, and I'm looking forward to some discussion here.
So am I. Let it rip.
Let it rip.
We are too.
I love it. Well, let's start off, Jim. I'm going to start off with you on the writing of the book. You write in the book about why you started it, but you chose it to be a biography, but also a life lesson. Explain that a little bit.
Well, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, and he talks about people who do extraordinary things. So started out, I've observed Barry, I've known Barry over 30 years now, and I've observed him and the things that he does. I knew his story, but I didn't know it all that well. And once I learned his story, I told him, one day I'm going to write your biography. In that process, I opened up the discussion of his biography, saying that Barry's been an inspiration in my life. I've learned so much. And so our publicist said, this is a life lesson book. So we put in 17 life lessons that I've learned from Barry's life. And he's had a tremendous impact on my life. So I thought, and as we're finding as people read the book, that's really what has been very beneficial to them, to sort of reflect on their lives as we go forward.
Well, it's been interesting to me, Colonel Bridger, Barry, this is something that really, starts off with your story. I do have a question for you, for those, and it'll come after this, but you, of course, as we've said before, a Vietnam fighter pilot, also POW, Hanoi Hilton. I have a question, and you mentioned in here about John McCain, I saw later in the book. Did you also know Sam Johnson?
I did indeed. Now, I didn't know him up there, but I knew him when I came home. I take that back. I did. I lived with him in the same dang home room. Yeah, I remember playing chess with him. Yes.
Sam,
Good man.
Hey, Sam, you talk about people who make a difference in your life. Sam and Jim, I like the way you put that. Sam was that for me when I was in Congress. And the one thing I remember, and Barry, from what I've read in your book, the book so far, and what we're going to get in this, is I watched Sam come to the floor in Congress, especially as he got older, and you could see the marks of what y'all went through. Okay, you could see it in his hands, you could see the bend in his hands, you could see it. But the one thing that he always walked on the floor of that house, no matter where he was, no matter how he felt, he always had a pleasant spirit about him. And I see that in this book. I see this in the writing. Just in general, there's a conception about the POW and the treatment that you had. What made it that you could come out of that in a way, besides these life lessons? If you just sort of look at it, you, Sam Johnson, John McCain, there's many others of you that have survived and thrived. What do you think made the difference?
What we value about life, about living, about being. That's what made the difference. I talk a lot about values because in the prison camps of North Vietnam, Sam and I were witnesses to the powerful and the pervasive impact that traditional American values had on my fellow POWs, not only to engage, but to survive the pressure cooker environment of the Hanoi Hilton. I could not believe the quality of individuals that I was bumping into, tapping on walls, never seeing their face the whole time I was there, and realizing what incredible human beings I was blessed to go through this night of terror with.
It is amazing. Sam, actually, I got to spend a night with him and others, and him just talking about some of his experience. And he talked about developing that TAP system. And he talked about it in terms of, and this is something, Barry, I want for you to communicate to maybe to the younger podcast listener who's listening to this and they have only a memory of Vietnam. It's something way in the past, unlike for others of us. But Sam made a statement to me one time, and he said that the tapping that he and others came up with was so important because it connected each of you to each other in a way. Explain that for those of us who pick up a phone or make calls. Why is it that those tapping was so important?
Tapping and communicating was absolutely critical in order for us to survive as a group. You couldn't survive by yourself. You needed help. And we had plenty of it because we had shared values. I was a beneficiary of that communication system, and we worked very hard to amplify it, and we did eventually amplify it. Tom McNish, buddy of mine, in fact, my roommate in Hanoi, came up with what he called the POW TAP code, and hand code, POW hand code. And if you took the deaf mute code and tried to figure out to make letters with your hands so that you had big letters, for example, an A, we could hold up one finger, that's an A. You can see that with good eyes, and we had great eyes, up to about 100 yards away. Yep. And so this is a B, it looks like the letter B. So anyway, using his hand code, it revolutionized our communication capabilities and made life not only bearable, but survivable. We had to communicate to survive.
Well, and one of the things in looking up the lessons, and we're going to get back to your history, Jim, I want to switch back to you for just a second. In looking at these life lessons, what he just talked about communication, and I've looked at over some of the ways you've titled these chapters, and that is, finding what you're thankful for, adopting values, standing shoulder to shoulder to those who came before you, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, patience. Those were all communication skills that when you met Barry, when he came back and you were teaching, it's communication that actually connects us to each other, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. It's it's the way that we become friends, the way we become lifelong friends, as Barry and I have become. We both were in financial services together, and Barry developed ways of communicating to clients, better ways to communicate why people needed financial plans. and I was director of training at that time. So we worked together to provide these to the other financial advisors that we work with. Barry actually was our top producer for 4 years while he was a financial advisor. And one of the reasons was because of the experiences that he had. Those experiences caused him to think about why financial independence was important, and he could communicate it in a way, and protection was important. He could communicate it in a way that none of the rest of us could communicate it.
That's pretty well. Barry, going back to your looking at the book and thinking about, again, the traumatic experience of being a POW in Hanoi Hilton during that time. Your life though started off in a way that was, sort of at best challenging. Explain your time. You're an orphan, and give the listener a little bit. We've talked about that part. We're going to get back to the POW part, but being an orphan also affected you as well, didn't it?
Oh, heck yes. That was quite an experience. My first memory of life was a big room with a picnic style tables with a bunch of screaming kids. The walls were painted drab green and brown, and there was a toilet nearby for us to throw up the green pea soup we ate so much of up. So we had a place at least to deposit it. And it was a wild affair, and it was every man for himself. And the older kids took all the balls and bats or whatever the heck might be available for the younger kids. We just didn't have any of that. So we had to make up our own fun. And one thing we started doing was climbing up in a chinaberry tree and hanging up there like a bunch of vultures. But the older kids couldn't come up there. They were scared to come up because they had never been up there. They didn't have to go up there, but we did. And we got strong as heck. And if we caught one of those older kids in the top of that tree, we'd run him out of there. So it was just a battle the whole time. And then I was given the opportunity to go home with the Spake family and spend the weekend. And you have to realize that this orphan had never seen a pond of water. I'd never seen a train. I'd never seen cars other than just pieces of them. And so everything was an incredible adventure for me. And I spent the night with this family and got up before everybody the next day because I couldn't wait to get up and look around. And I walked out in front of the garage, and I had never seen a goldfish pond. And there's a goldfish pond with goldfish. I'm perplexed. What is this? And I'm 5 years old, and I'm looking at these goldfish. Now comes their son, Ellis, who's a bigger boy. And I took an immediate disliking the first time I saw him. And he grabbed one of the goldfish and started squeezing the life out of it. I went ballistic. I immediately jumped on him, knocked him into the goldfish pond, knocked the goldfish out of his hands. Here comes his dad and grabs me by the nape of the neck, picks me up, puts me in his car, takes me back to the orphanage. And my first trip away from the orphanage did not go well.
You ended up back at the orphanage. At the orphanage too, and I think this is a great preparation. And Jim, you talk about this in your part of the writing. It was the relationships there, and I'm gonna let Barry, Jim talk about this. Well, tell us about Billy.
Billy was the only dear friend that I had in the orphanage. We were about the same age. I met within a year probably. And he and I spent all of our time hanging up in that daggone chinaberry tree and entertaining one another. And then one day I was sitting in the chinaberry tree, and the headmaster comes out underneath the tree, looks up and says, "Billy, come with me." So Billy comes out of the tree, goes with the headmaster up to the main building. I'm sitting up in the chinaberry tree, and pretty soon, within about 15 minutes, here comes Mr. Spake, Mrs. Spake, their son Ellis in a row, and Billy is in tow. And they get in a car and leave. And I never saw my friend Billy again. I was all alone in the chinaberry tree. And it was very emotional for me.
Wow.
And I think that, to your point, Doug, I tried to, as I worked with Barry on this book, to get him to connect to being a POW from that experience. It was so traumatic for him at such a young age. I believe that Barry at that point decided that he would take control of his life and he would not let anybody do that to him again. And so it hardened him, which I think prepared him for the Hanoi Hilton later on in life.
Yeah. Did and I know you said you didn't, did you never see Billy again?
Never saw my friend Billy again.
Wow.
And I hung around that tree by the weeks and months, hoping to see him again, but he left my life forever.
Wow. Have you ever had a chance to actually maybe try to find him?
I haven't, because like most of us, I've been so busy living life. I was never I had plenty to do. I wouldn't have minded visiting with Billy, but I had more than I could handle, and I was enjoying it.
I can understand that. Well, I have to tell you, one of the great things about your book, I wrote a book. I didn't include pictures. I wasn't as creative with that. But Jim, in this book, Barry, Myrtle and Henry Bridger.
Oh my gosh, saints.
I mean, I look at this photo, and especially Myrtle. She looks like, I mean, it's got that same look as my grandma. And but you talk about eating. Could she cook?
Say that again.
Could she cook?
Well, we had a maid that did most of the cooking that lived in an apartment next to our home. In other words, I was adopted by a very well-to-do family.
Yep. I wanted to see if this came out.
Yeah, I had just arrived in my hometown, in my new home, and I had to learn all over again my me first mentality, which I had developed in the orphanage because it was survival of the fittest, and that's the way I played the game. It seemed to work the best. But now Miss Myrtle and Mr. Henry get in my face the first time I get into Bladenboro, and Mom explains to me, from now on, your neighbors come first and you come last. And that is the most important message I got from my mom and dad. You're last, not first.
That is good. What did and I'm still going through the book. What did Mr. Henry do?
Oh man, what didn't he do?
Really?
Insurance business, and the cattle business, and the farming business, and the cotton man, the cotton gin. He was a wonderful human being, and everybody adored him. I've never met a soul that did not adore my dad. My adopted dad, of course.
Let me ask you, Jim, in writing this book, and we're getting into the life lessons, the parts of going to Vietnam here in a minute. But in writing this and listening to Barry tell this story, did you catch the parts that you began to know later in life? Were you seeing the pieces developed in this early story of the orphanage, and then his new mom and dad, this loss of Billy? You've already mentioned a little bit. Are you seeing the building blocks to who you met in the 80s?
Absolutely. Barry came out of the orphanage a little rough around the edges, and the Bridgers smoothed that out. And it took a long time. If you see in the book that Barry was still getting advice from his mother when he was about 18 years old. And there's a letter in there from his mom telling him how to operate around the family. So Barry really looked up to his parents, but he was an unguided missile. He wanted to see the world. He didn't see it in the first 6 years of his life. So he made it, he had to get caught up. And in fact, there's a great story in there, Doug, about the first night that Barry was at the Bridger home and what happened. And Barry, why don't you share that story of what you did that first night, which caused a lot of problems in your new hometown?
The first night I spent with the Bridger family, they took me upstairs, opened the door to a room I had not seen. As I stepped through the threshold, I noticed a a propeller on the ceiling, and all kinds of flight paraphernalia all around the room, with a private bath, a balcony, things I had never dreamed of seeing. I'm staring in the face and I fall asleep. And immediately around 3 to 4 in the morning, I awake abruptly. I get up, I get dressed, I walk outside of the house to what we call Main Street. And it was real simple in my hometown of Bladenboro. You had a back street and a main street. You couldn't get lost real easily. So I walked out to Main Street, turned left, started walking at 4 in the morning by myself. By daybreak, I was around 7 miles from home, not knowing where I was, but absolutely having the time of my life, looking at things I never dreamed of. I mean, everywhere I looked, fireflies, barred owls hooting in the distance. I'm gonna turn into a big wildlife guy as a result of all that. But I'm out there having the time of my life with not a care in the world. And about that evening, the darkness fell, daybreak came, and the next evening, it's 8 o'clock at night, so I'm in my second day, and I'm still just walking down that daggone dirt road, and I see a car, because I know what a car is, and I had seen headlights, and it's coming my way, and I thought, I'm gonna stand right here, and I'm gonna watch that car go by. And so I'm standing there looking as hard as I can go. This car pulls up, it's got bubble guns on top. Guy rolls his window down, looks at me, says, "Your name's Barry." I said, "How did you know my name?" The whole damn world knew my name.
Yeah, they were all looking for Barry. He was 6 years old at that time.
I got to go back a second, because this is one of those profound messages that I received that every young kid deserves to hear. I certainly did deserve it. And that was, I came out of the orphanage system with a me first mentality, and I was very selfish, and I took care of me. And my mom started off with being nice and telling me that the neighbors come first. Well, as time unfurled, and you already mentioned I was around 19, I came home one night, walked up to my room, clicked the light on, and there's a letter lying on the bed. And I picked up the letter and I began to read. And the more I read, the more I cried. It's hard for me to talk about this.
I understand.
Mom had written a letter, and I'll paraphrase it. She said, "You're starting to do things that trouble me. You come and go, and you only seem to stop here to get something to eat or pick up some clothes. And that pattern will not work when you're a dad and a husband."
Wow.
And then at the end, she says, "However, we're not going to give up on you, and you're not going to give up on yourself. And my prayers will be answered that you will become a great dad and husband." From that day forward, I changed dramatically.
Wow. Jim, you can see that in your friend here. I mean, I can hear it in his voice if you're listening on this podcast or watching on this podcast. I mean, that's emotion. It's the kind of stuff that change you. And this was just still at 19 years of age. Barry, go ahead and tell me this now, because I mean, about that time will be the time that you'll be getting ready. How did you end up in the Air Force and end up in Vietnam?
Well, my brother turned out to flying the hump with Barry Goldwater in C-47s, and he was flying T-38s and P-41s and 40 Mustangs and all of those aircraft to the South Pacific. He was an incredible aviator. He didn't have any GPS. He had to get his wind corrector. You were in deep doo-doo at daybreak, Wake Island, that type of thing. You talk about the men that flew aircrafts in those days and the men who fought those battles on the ground and whatnot. You talk about extraordinary human beings. They're amazing, every one of them. Now dropped off of my.
There you go. You're good.
Okay.
So did you take out, now you were, let's get this straight for our listeners. So you were much younger than your adopted brothers, correct?
Right. He was in his probably, I was 20 years younger.
20 years younger. Okay. All right. So it came time to go to school, how did you get into the Air Force?
Okay. So what happened? Because of my brother's influence, obviously, I wanted to be an aviator. And when I arrived at the University of North Carolina for my freshman year, I marched first directly to be signed up for ROTC. And I completed the ROTC program. And I went from there into the Air Force directly, learning to fly T-38s and T-37s in those days. And it wasn't too long after that, I got to go overseas.
When you were doing T-38s, where were you doing your training at?
Big Spring, Texas, Webb Air Force Base.
Well, yeah, I was stationed at Moody Air Force. I'm back at Warner Robins right now, but I was at Moody, and Moody still had the T-38s for a long time. In fact, that was where George Bush actually did some of his initial flight training in T-38s was at Moody.
Yeah, that was a fun aircraft.
It's pretty fascinating. Jim, before we get into before I get Barry into the war and actually, getting shot down, spending that time and then move forward, let's stop it here for a second and get from your perspective of coaching and teaching what this book is about of life lessons. As you were writing this and putting these life lessons together, was there a progression for the listener out there that, so many times they think, and I appreciate Barry's story about getting the letter and his life changed. A lot of people will experience that moment of saying, okay, this has shook me to my core. I want to change. What about the building blocks in this book that can allow somebody to have that moment and then begin to put it to real use in the future?
Yeah, it progresses through his life. So as time goes on, the lessons are more indelible. They make such an impact on someone's life. And the one that when we get into him being a POW, chapter 10 really changed my life. Chapter 10 changed my life. And so they sort of build up to that point. And then we put in there, as time goes on, we start reflecting. We got Barry to reflect, what has made this a life worth living? Why is an individual who has gone through what he went through throughout his life is still very happy, very successful, and still reimagining himself at the age of 81?
Doug,
so, go ahead,
Barry.
Doug, let me add something to this. I'll introduce it with this thought. A spark can create a fire.
Yep.
I can't tell you how surprised I was about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago to get a letter from an individual that was in my ROTC unit. And the letter read something like, "Dear Barry, I know you're not expecting this. I know you've forgotten me after all these years, but I want you to know that not too long ago, I was reminiscing over the people that I had met in my lifetime that had a profound and positive impact on my life. And the first name that popped up was yours. And I want you to know how important our relationship was, as it turned out, for me." Then I got another letter, same basic set of words. So all I can say to all of us is, look out, you're influencing people all the time, and a spark can create a fire. Make sure it's well contained.
Amen, Barry. I agree. I mean, I think the thing that we fail to realize so many times is we don't know how many people are watching us that we never know. And many times we fail to recognize the ones that are watching us. We forget that they are lessons, and that's our kids and our family members beside us. They're watching everything. And as a father, we know that. You've made it now to Vietnam. You got out of training. You come to Vietnam. You're in, I believe, your 75th, was it, mission?
Well, that's enough. 75 will work for me.
and that was the one. It was the last one for a while, wasn't it, Barry?
Yep, that's exactly right.
if you would, give us a little bit about what happened on that mission.
That day, we were sending up about 60 aircraft to try to suck up the MiG-21s. A few weeks earlier, we had pretended we were F-105s, and we sucked up the MiGs and shot down 7 of their MiG-21s, and they had about maybe 7 left. And we were up to try and do it again. We figured that the North Vietnamese had forgotten what happened, and we were going to try and do the same trick. But on that particular mission of about 60 aircraft, and I was in like the first wave of probably 6 or 8 aircraft in groups of 4. But anyway, we were carrying something called the QR-160 pod, which jams the guidance radar signal from a ground unit to the aircraft, or excuse me, to the missile once it's fired, and guides it into the aircraft. And we were told by the scientists who briefed us, since it was a new system, that if when you turned it on, it didn't work, you couldn't get it running correctly, to slide up next to your element leader, and his QRC-160 pod would jam for both of you. Well, sure enough, my pod was not working. And so I slid up. I was a number 4 aircraft. I slid up close to number 3, and I'm sitting there, but I did have a raw scope, and the raw scope showed every radar signal that was hitting my aircraft. I just had to figure out which one it was. Is it a, an anti-aircraft radar signal, or is it something else, So, but I knew how to do that. And that day it was really bad weather. It was just weather from the 0 all the way up to about 24,000 feet, clouds, breaks in the clouds here and there. And so I realized I wasn't going to be able to get my system to work. So I slid up next to the 4 aircraft, and we're in what we call pod formation, a flight of 4 pretty tight together. And supposedly the jamming pod is going to take care of everybody, although I had none. And I was using number 3s. Well, all of a sudden, my raw scope showed a strobe at left 11 o'clock and left 8 o'clock. And I'm looking at, it's the fan song radar signal. And I know I'm being looked at by an SA-2 guidance radar system. And so I started looking very hard down because I knew where to look. The other folks' raw scope did not work because they had the QRC working, and it blanked out your
right.
detection system. And so I'm looking real hard, and I see a flash of intense light coming up through the clouds, and I realize it's a missile. I hit the button that said shark flight break left, SAM's 10 o'clock low, and everybody's turning real gentle in pod formation. And I said, this ain't gonna work. He is looking at me, I have no doubt. I flipped upside down and pulled as hard as I could pull, and went straight down. The missile went off at about 24,000 feet. It blew the right wing off, half the left wing, and the tail. And I had never seen all of the lights on my F4 come on at the same time. All of a sudden, this light pops on and says, you need to service your oil pressure. You're overheating on your left engine. You're on fire on the right engine. And I saw something I'd never seen as a caution light, said you're in deep kimchi. So anyway, I decided this was not good. And about that time, the missile exploded. Bam. And all that stuff. And I was reported when the guys got back down, Bridger is missing in action, but he's probably killed in action. And,
really?
That's an interesting story by itself, because when that information flowed down to my little hometown in Bladenboro, the citizens of my little community, maybe 600 or 800 people at that time, they broke into 2 groups. One group said not even Bridger could survive that. The other group said baloney. Bridger, he did. It don't happen. Well, within months, the word got out that I was alive, and the town went bonkers. Part of you.
I love it. Now, Barry, was your mom and dad still alive? Your adopted mom and dad?
They did not have to endure that. It was my brother, who had been in World War II. He survived with his family, so that was my family at that point.
Okay. All right. Now, and Jim, you explained this out an incident, and you talked about this. Before we get back, Barry, the next step is capture. But Barry, Jim, you made a comment that 10 changed your life. And for those who don't know, the title to that chapter is "Make Every Day a Good Day by Controlling Your Mind." Jim, why did that change your life?
Well, we have all experienced, or a lot of people have experienced, and people say, control what goes into your brain. It can have a deep effect as to how you approach life. And so we were interviewing Barry regarding his time in the Hanoi Hilton. The question posed to him was, what was your worst day in the Hanoi Hilton? Now, as Barry will share, there was torture, there was loneliness, there was that not knowing if the individual was going to come back. Does anybody even care at home over that many years? And Barry, who's very energetic, very quick to answer, sat back quietly and sat there. And he thought for a while. And then he said, I don't think I had a bad day. He said, when you have control of your mind, you will never have a bad day. And what that changed was, I had heard that time and time again, motivational speakers, individuals saying about your mind. But it finally hit me that if someone like Barry could have a good day every day, why couldn't I? And that changed my life. Now, I will tell you, I still have bad days, but they're very minimal because of what he said.
That's the same. I mean, it's this is beaming true here, and I wish I had Sam to bring into this right now, Barry, with you. Sam, of course, has departed from us, but Sam had that same attitude, and it was, again, I've been through this, and I controlled that mind part of it. Barry, walk us through, because from the vast majority of people, and most people would never experience a POW situation, especially falling from the sky. What was the first 24 to 48 hours like after you were brought out? You were shot down, you landed. What was that first 48 hours like?
Well, first of all, I was hoping with all those clouds, when I finally came through the last layer of clouds, I was landing in a jungle, because I'm a big outdoorsman. I'd love to have had that opportunity, but I landed about 212 yards from the front gate of the Hanoi Hilton, downtown Hanoi. So if you can't take a joke, don't fly. So anyway, some of the brave citizens where I landed ran up and hit me with their fists and whatnot. And my backseater, he got hit a bit, but we literally got shooed right into the system. And the first place you ended up was Heartbreak Hotel. That's for all the very, very, very new guys. And then not far from that was the torture center. And I was treated to my backseater screaming bloody murder for about 2 or 3 hours until it stopped. And then my door opened. And so we were going through what all of us went through. If you didn't give them more than your name, rank, service number, and date of birth, then they didn't fool around. You went immediately into the straps, which was their primary torture technique, in which they put your arms behind your back in manacles. Manacles have no chain in between, they're rigid. And the wrist of the Vietnamese is much smaller than the typical wrist of an American, so it bit into the flesh when they tighten those things up on your wrist behind your back. Then they ran a nylon strap, which was about 20 feet long, starting at your wrist, and they kept pulling your elbows together, and then the shoulder muscles, they pulled them out of the sockets and tied you up and left you there and shut the door and walked off. Absolutely incredible pain within a few minutes. And then it just got worse and worse. How long you could last in the straps was, depending on you, but it was anywhere from a few hours to, if you were lucky, to get a day or two. And then they brought you in and get to an interrogation after you basically said, yeah, my name is so-and-so. And they brought in 2 MiG-21 pilots. And if I give you an example of mine, we call that resorting to a second line of resistance, when they ask you a question and you respond, other than saying, name, rank, service number, date of birth. Well, the interrogator, in my case, was a guy we call Pig Eye, because he had a funny little red dot on one of his eyes bouncing around. And he said to me, and this is, by the way, probably pretty typical of what we all did. He said to me, "How fast can the F-4 fly?" And here are these two MiG-21 pilots sitting there along with the interrogator. And they asked me that question. I looked at him. I said, it's very fast. And he turns to the MiG pilot. He says, "Hey, the guy says it's very fast." He said, "Well, yeah, we won't know how fast." So he comes back and says, "How fast is it fly?" I said, "I'm not allowed to fly fast. I'm a junior pilot." And he turned to the MiG-21 guys. He said, "That son of a bitch he's a junior pilot. He can't fly fast." They said, "Okay." And you were tempted to play games is what I'm trying to tell you. You were tempted, but you better not.
Exactly. As time progressed in the Hanoi Hilton, did your time change? You were there, of course, over 5 months. You were there, 5 months ahead of McCain, right?
About right. Yeah.
That's what and I was reading my time frame there. You were there before him. After you came through, as you said, the Heartbreak Hotel, the torture, and that initial phase. Describe how it was like, because I've heard these stories before, but it'd be interesting to hear from you. Did you became into as best you can describe it, a normal battle rhythm? That it became there were different parts of the day, but it was a very similar thing as the time increased. Would that be true?
Yeah, we developed all kinds of ways to entertain ourselves, and plus we spent most of our time helping those in greater need than ourselves that desperately needed us to intervene in whatever way we could. So we were busy as the dickens taking care of each other.
Yeah, even when you didn't have didn't have the resources and they wasn't taking care of you.
And we weren't even face to face.
Exactly, and you
had doing all kinds of crazy things.
Wow. Now, were you a part of any of the? I know that at one point they had the videos that the North Vietnamese tried to do as propaganda kind of stuff. Was that ever a part that you had to go through?
Not that I'm aware of. They never came that I recall it. But I have a story to tell that's dang interesting. When I got shut down, shrapnel hit my helmet.
Right.
And I was bleeding like a stuck pig, and all the blood coming out of the head with a big gash on top of my head, down into my face and down into my flight suit. So I looked like I might be dying not pretty soon. I looked pretty bad. And I immediately said, I'm going to play this for everything it's worth to try and convince the North Vietnamese that I can't see. I started that the day I hit the ground. And they took me into this torture chamber program, and I was tortured multiple times. They were asking me questions, but they finally got around to deciding we need to get everybody to write a biography. And so they asked me to write a biography one day, and I said, this was after I'd been through all that torture session. I said, no, I'm not going to write a biography. So they took me to the torture chamber. That was the way they did everybody. If you didn't do what they said, then you went to the torture chamber. And so they put me in a room. They put 2 bricks on the ground. They told me to put my knees on the bricks. This was typical for a lot of us. And then hold our arms straight up. And they stood there in this little teeny room with a door in the front of the room. And I forgot that there was a window in the back of the room, which caused me some grief later. And they said, okay, now you must stay there until you write biography. Well, I was there 5 days and 5 nights. And I said, okay, I'll write you a biography. Now, what all of us did when we went to a second line of resistance, we would do things like one of my buddies, he wrote, when they asked him to write his biography, he says, I have a pet electric duck. I wind it up and it flies around my room and goes quack, quack, quack. That was his biography. And they thought that was great. And so what I did instead is I took my left hand, which I'm pretending I can't see, and I scribbled something you would never be able to figure it out. And I put things like D-E-L, A-A-B. I just put random letters on a page. And they thought that was great, so they took off and left that alone. Now, here's the interesting part. One day, the interrogator comes to my room. He opens up the peephole and says, you write biography? I said, yep, wrote a good one. He shuts the peephole and leaves, comes back 2 days later and says, you sure you write biography? I said, did you lose my biography? Shut the damn thing. Well, he comes back a third time. He says, tonight we take you to hospital. If you lie, you'll be severely treated. And they put me in a Jeep and took me to the Hanoi hospital. They go upstairs, second floor. They've got it's a room with a desk at one end and a chair for me and for the interrogator. And then at the other end, they have a technician, and he opens up a drape, and it's the eye chart. The E is about the size of a small car. It's so big. And he takes his pointer, which looks like a pool cue, and he's pointing at the E. And then the interrogator says to me, he says, "Okay, now you must tell us, what is the letter?" And I did this. I stood up on my feet, and I started turning around in a slow circle saying, "Where is it? Where is the letter?" I'm doing this stuff. And he's about to have a fit. And so I played that for all it was worth. And finally they got frustrated and took me and threw me back in my room. 2 years go by. They have now opened up a camp which holds 150 on either side by a brick wall separated. And we called it the good guy camp. In other words, we weren't getting tortured every day, but just ever so often. Anyway, one of the things I had learned to do to bide my time, and we were all doing this, I learned to juggle. And I made my own little balls out of string and paper and whatever. I had 5 balls that I could throw up, and I could juggle them and keep them going. Well, one day in this new camp, I'm in the big room we had, and I'm practicing my juggling. And unbeknownst to me, the interrogator that took me to the hospital is standing in the doorway watching me juggle. And the first thing I hear is, "You lie! You lie!" And I looked up, I said, "Oh my gosh, it's a damn interrogator." And I said, "Okay, Bridger, you got to be real careful what you do at this point. It's got to be convincing, and it's got to be emotional." And I looked at him, I said, "No lie, used to juggle 10, now I'm at 5. And this interrogator looked at me, he said, "Damn, that's pretty bad. You've dropped it off quite a bit." He left.
That is amazing. That's amazing. Jim,
what we were doing constantly.
Yeah.
well, that was and again, it goes to this idea of controlling your mind. You were the one controlling, even though you were being held captive. You were controlling the day.
I absolutely was.
And I think that's such an important lesson for me. It's such an important lesson, and I'm gonna make my kids, my boys watch this and others, out there. I mean, it's a matter of controlling your day. I can't tell you how many days, and I've pastored for a number of years, and I told people, I said, how many times have you let somebody who cut you off maybe in the morning going to work, you got mad at them, you yelled at them, and you were mad the whole morning, and they didn't even know you existed. It's a matter of your mind being there. Jim, we talked about this, and I'm going to get Barry here in just a second. This idea of mind, though, I think contributed to what you and I talked about before we started, and that's this issue of PTSD.
Right.
And in the book, you talked about that. Do you think that had a lot to do with that?
I think it did. As I was telling you, Doug, I've studied the brain, and I couldn't believe that our POWs had such a low rate of PTSD. And I think that what happens in life, and this is just my theory on it, is that it's those surprise things that we allow to get to us. Yep. Like you say, somebody cutting you off, you're not expecting it, you get enraged. But I think what happened with the POWs is that they decided that they would take control of their lives. Because what else did they have? They had a dirt floor and maybe a towel to lay on or something like that. They had nothing. But if they allowed themselves to accept where they were and that they would never get better, they would have trouble. And so I think that controlling of the mind did contribute to their low rate of PTSD. And they knew they were going to get tortured. This wasn't, everybody around them was being tortured. In fact, they made, as Barry is talking about it, they made games of these things.
Right.
So that they turned what was terrible into fun.
Well, let me just give this to the listener out there. Listen to this, that the rates, and this was a 2009 study that said almost 31% of Vietnam veterans had PTSD, 10% of Gulf War veterans, 11% of veterans of war in Afghanistan, and 20% of Iraq, and the 5% of POWs from Vietnam.
Yes, that's right.
Barry, turning back to you, and I think Jim laid that out pretty well. But Barry, when you got, I'm going to take it a step further because we know that what happened there was terrible, the torture. Tell me about the last few days and then getting back home.
Let me interject something.
You go right ahead.
What we had was three things: leadership, we had humor, and competition to get us through all that crap. We were busy as hell competing with each other. Can you imagine having a competition to see who could remain in the torture chamber the longest? Only a bunch of Yanks would do that.
All right.
And we had leadership. One of the most extraordinary leaders we had was Admiral James B. Stockdale.
Okay. He
was an aviator and was an extraordinary leader up there for us. And he's done a lot of writing about how to resist and how to overcome the great trials and tribulations. And he was a real reason why we were able to get along with one another and do it in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. I can't say enough about Admiral Stockdale. However, we also were just constantly doing humorous things. For example, I got a tap on my wall one day after I had moved in with about 36 POWs whom they considered to be troublemakers and instigators. And they put us in a punishment camp as an object lesson to all the rest of the group, back about 550 total. And as an object lesson to say, if you don't do what we tell you, you're going to be put into the punishment camp. Well, I'd been there a few days and there's a tap on my wall. And he taps to me and it says, this individual says, "Hey, this is John McCain. Who's that?" And I tap back, "Bridger." He taps back to me, "Barry." He says, "I have a problem." And I went thump, thump, which meant pause, be danger, don't move, be quiet. And I looked around my room, which was 5 foot by 6 foot. And I said, "I wonder what John's got I don't got." So I went back to the wall and sarcastically tapped to John. I said, "John, what is your problem?" And he taps back to me. He says, "There's a great big snake in my room." Well, I grew up in the swamps of North Carolina. I loved snakes. They were my pets. Used to put them around your neck. John didn't do that. He was not happy with his dang snakes. So if I tapped to John, I said, "John, I have some good news and I have some bad news." And this is the humor thing now. I said, "The good news is that snake doesn't want anything to do with you. He's looking for a rat. So get away from the snake and just be set still. He'll find a hole and go into that soft concrete and disappear." So that's the good news. The bad news, if you let that snake bite you, he's either a bamboo viper, a crate, or a cobra. Any one of which will have you'll be dead in 2 minutes and 14 seconds because they're all neurotoxic. And he goes, "Yeah, thanks a lot." And so that was the kind of stuff we were leadership and humor and competition was the order of the day.
I think that is the amazing thing. And I'm not going to, the stories here are incredible. And I want people to go and get this book called The Spirit to Soar. And I'm showing it right now on the screen for those listening on the podcast. I'm not going to go into depth of all the lessons, Jim. I think I want people to go and get this book and learn these lessons. Barry, your story is amazing. I do want to give you though, Barry, I think, because Jim highlighted this and I've heard it in Jim's voice every time I've talked to him, Barry. He talks about Sheila and he talks about your girls and your mom who had told you and gave you that letter about being a husband and a father. I'm going to give you sort of a chance to sort of say, we never feel like we do well enough, but it looks like that was one of the objects after you got back and got married and started that family, that was the priority given to you by a deceased, by a family who took you in and were no longer there.
Well, my response is every day we have a new opportunity to do well. And we didn't always do well, but every day we were given another opportunity, God willing, to do well. And it was going on all the time, all around me, which is infectious. Everybody was pitching in and trying to do better. And we were all trying to help each other, safeguard our health under these terrible conditions. We had people who had different kinds of problems that were really difficult, but they survived it with our help. And so I keep that thought in mind. Every day I can do better. I'm better than that was one of my slogans. You're better than that. Let's act like it. And that's the way I look at it. And by the way, the PTSD, people have asked me how much PTSD you have. And honestly, I don't think I ever had 1 milligram of it. I just never thought about it. It never crossed my mind. I was busy helping great Americans live.
That is it. And your family now has played a great part in that now, hasn't it?
Oh, Sheila is, there's nothing that lady doesn't do well. Talk about a spark turning into a forest fire. In fact, when I'm praying, I tell the Lord, I said, I know what you're doing. You're putting me on ice until I get back so I can marry Sheila. I said, could you speed that up a little bit? Those were my prayers back in those days. I didn't know Sheila back then, but I knew there was somebody waiting for me.
I love it. Barry, just a couple of last questions, and Jim, I want to sort of end it with you on this. But Barry, a couple of things. Do you keep in touch with those that are still living?
We have a network, and we have information flowing amongst the POWs. Initially, it was amazing. We had speakers like Henry Kissinger, and we had annual functions and whatnot. But over time, we've all settled into our old age, as would be expected. But we're trying to make a difference in the lives of our grandkids and our friends around us. And there's plenty of opportunity to do that. And that's what we are privileged to do and pleased to do.
I understand. One question that I've always had the Vietnam, I had an uncle there. I've served now in Iraq and going back, but it always has sort of stuck with me that time. I was born, Barry, about a year before you were shot down. And looking at that, I've seen the movies over time, and we know the POWs that were released at one time. Was there ever a thought that we actually still had POWs still there?
From my perspective, there was no evidence of that we witnessed.
Right.
Put it that way. I will bring up this point, and it may be a valid point. If you look at the B-52s, I think there were about 13 B-52s shot down somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right.
And one of the interesting data points is that the crew on a B-52 is you've got EWOs, and you've got pilots, you've got co-pilots, and you've got a whole variety of different skill sets that are on that B-52. But if you look at the POWs who ended up in the prison camps that were B-52 related, we had almost no EWOs, which makes you wonder that if the Soviets working with the Chinese working with the North Vietnamese did not, in fact, and the thought was, or I can't remember that people had been moved out into the Soviet Union because of their skill set.
I can say that. Jim, if there was somebody out there listening to this podcast and wanted to get this book, number one, where would they get the book? And what kind of thought would you want them to be left with after listening to this podcast?
Well, first of all, they can get the book on any major bookseller site. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, any of those sites. But we also have our own site that they can purchase it, and that's www.thespirit.com, and you can order it there also. So books available. We're getting a lot of great feedback. I'll leave you with one story there, Doug.
Okay.
Barry's heard me talk about it, but I had a friend who had a bad COVID experience. He was going on a cruise, didn't have COVID before he got to Rome, Italy, and they tested him, and he had COVID. They wouldn't let him go on the cruise, put him in a hotel, not a very nice hotel, for 10 days. because that was a quarantine. His wife was in a different room because she didn't have COVID. Pretty lonely during that time. After the 10 days, they tested him again, and he had to stay another 10 days. He still had COVID. So 3 weeks in a hotel. He couldn't wait to get back to the U.S. And he said to me, thanks for the book. I had given him the book because he knew Barry and
Right.
gave him a copy of the book. And I said, did you have a chance to read it? He said, I did. I read a little bit of it before I got there. I read the rest of it there. And he goes, I thought my life was bad. It was nothing compared to Barry's. And it got me through the 21 days. So I would say that these life lessons that are in there, they're for you. They're for your children. They're for your grandchildren. They're for your nieces, nephews, whoever you know, because there's something in there that'll make an impact on you. And the reason for writing the book and getting the story out there, Barry doesn't think there's anything special about him. And it takes people outside of him to see that he meets that outlier definition that Malcolm Gladwell talked about. And I thank you, Doug, for giving us this time with you.
Well,
Doug, I want you to tell Sam. Oh no, Sam passed away. When did he pass away?
about 3 years ago, I think, or 2 or 3 years ago.
That really upsets me. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, bless his heart.
Well, yeah, and that's so neat you say that, Barry. Sam made a story, and I'm going to sort of suck time up here. Sam made me think about my family and my life and everything, and a story very similar to what you told. He told this story about in his devotion to his wife. And he said that, and the story was that every night while he was in capture, his wife would set a place at the table for him and would actually make food for him. And he did the whole time. Wow. And when I was in Congress, they were, she was still alive. She died. And he told that story. And I can remember him being very emotional about that she was gone. And how he had poured. I mean, this is a man who could have asked for sympathy and people would have gave it to him. He never asked for it. In fact, he gave off. And his love for his wife and his children, when she passed, you could begin to see his light slowly, go out, because it was that love that kept him going during that time that she gave. It's a powerful story of what y'all went through. It's a powerful story of the connection of the human spirit. And of what I believe God has given each of us to say that we can control the environment we're in. And Barry, you have blessed me. You've blessed this podcast audience today with your story. Jim, thank you for writing it. We may do a follow-up later and talk some more about this, but I wanted people to get this out. Go to where you get your books, called The Spirit to Soar by Jim Petterson. It's a story, true story of former orphan and POW Lieutenant Colonel Barry Bridger, United States Air Force retired, one of my branch. Jim, also one of mine, but I've been 20 years with the Air Force. Colonel Bridgers, you are an inspiration to me, and this story has been great, and I'm so glad to be able to share it here on the Doug Collins podcast. Please, folks, you'll want to share this podcast with folks all over the country, people who need to hear a good word. They need to know that the power of the day is within their hands. No matter what they've been dealt, it holds the key is in their mind, and it's a choice that they have to make. Thanks for being a part of this. Share this podcast with everyone that you see, and we'll see you next time. Hey, everybody, it's Doug Collins. I can't wait to tell you about a new partner here on the Doug Collins podcast, Healthy Cell. HealthyCell.com. You can go to their website. They are reimagining the way that we take vitamins. I mean, look, you don't still listen, for the most part, record players or for the vintage side. You look at for old time, you don't listen for the crispest, clearest. There's things out there that you get right now that have updated in the future. And we're still taking vitamins like we did back in the 1930s. This new technology, this new product from Healthy Cell is a microgel that takes your vitamins, puts them in a gel form. You can take it straight out of the pack. You can mix it in water or your favorite food, but it gets into your system so much quicker. 165% better absorption through this microgel technology. And believe me, the more you get in the nutrients into your body, the better you're going to be. They have a full product line. I take these medicine, these Metagel packets. They are amazing. We have been on them now for a little over a month, and I can tell the biggest difference. I've taken vitamins most of my adult life, and the way these work is just something that I don't think that you can find anywhere else. Again, it's healthycell.com. You can go /Collins or use Collins in the promo code to get a 20% discount. You don't want to miss this. Please go check out their website, healthycell.com. Microgel for these vitamins that are the best thing out there right now to keep you healthy and listening to the Doug Collins podcast. Folks, I don't know about you, but I cannot stand a towel that simply moves water around me after my shower. I like a towel that grabs you, takes the water, gets it off of you, and does what a towel's supposed to do, dry you off. I've had so many towels I bought over time. Some are expensive, some were cheap, but again, when they just sort of move the water around, I could just stay in the shower and stayed wet. I need a towel that gets me dry. That's where our friends at MyPillow come in. They have towels, and you're not going to believe the bargain that they have right now. Mike and the folks at MyPillow have offered a 6-piece towel set. That's 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths, regularly $109.99 for $39.99. All you got to do is have code word Collins. You can go to mypillow.com, or you can call them at 1-800-986-3994. If you want towels that actually do what they're supposed to do, dry you off. You know, that's what we do here on the Doug Collins podcast. We talk about real answers and real solutions for a complicated world. Well, sometimes you may not think that getting water off of you is a complicated process, but undoubtedly it is for some towel companies. It's not for the folks at MyPillow who actually have a towel, the My Towel, which is a great investment for you. And right now you can get it on sale regularly $109.99 for only $39.99. And that is with code word Collins. Also, anything else that you want to go on there, you can still got the slippers, you still got the My Pillows, you still got everything that is on that wonderful website. You want to go check it out. Use code name Collins and get your discounts. Folks at MyPillow are waiting on you right now.